And welcome into another edition of Gamecock Central Radio. I am Wes Mitchell alongside Chris Clark and coming at you from the GamecockCentral.com studios in Columbia, South Carolina. Talking, I guess, putting a bow on the South Carolina Texas A&M game, talking a little coaching search, and maybe a little Tennessee talk as well if we have time. Again, I'm Wes with Chris Clark. Chris, how's it going today?
Doing well. I don't know what our studio looks like. We have a studio triumvirate with our lovely producer Jeff. Lovely is that's a bad word.
Yeah, we're gonna have to
scrap that.
mark that spot there. I'll have to edit that out, Jeff. With the extremely talented Jeff Tyner.
There we go.
Producing there. Again, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark, Jeff Tyner, and I think first of all we start with Texas A&M, Chris, and a game that maybe was a surprise to a lot of people, and that South Carolina was able to hang around, keep it close. Really a lot to digest from that contest. I think, again, a tale of kind of two sides. You had, the offense, again, I think looked like there was more rhythm, like there was more comfort under the play calling of G.A. Mangus, but then a defense and an offense, again, that I think has been showing improvement the last 2 weeks. But on the other side, a defense that I won't say they got worse, but I think it's hard to say they've gotten better either. I think they actually look quite impressively the exact same as they have most of the year. What do you think, Chris?
No, I mean, that's a good point about the defense. It's been this team has really looked the same all year. That's a great point. There hasn't been a lot of differences, and part of that is just because, the scheme's been largely the same. There have been a whole lot of wholesale changes in that regard and adjustments. But it's been the same, things that have plagued this team. It's the short passing game. It's the runs up the middle. It's the quarterback runs, the draws, zone read. It's a lot of those same types of things that we're seeing week to week. And when South Carolina has actually been able to put together a decent defensive performance, it's been when the team's gotten turnovers. Like, look back at the North Carolina game, look back at the Vanderbilt game where they forced 5 turnovers. In the absence of those turnovers, it has not been very good for South Carolina for the most part. I think it's been those same sort of things that's plagued them. I mean, offensively, it is easy to see the improvement, and it was even easy to see that in the Vanderbilt game, and that seems a little bit silly because you look back at it and you go, they scored 19 points. They didn't improve. But, there was more in that game than just the score. I mean, they turned it over a couple times, including once at midfield. They dropped 2 or 3 touchdown passes. They missed a guy wide open. You couldn't point that and go, the play calling wasn't good. So I think the improvement started there, and it carried over into the A&M game where you looked at it, and I mean, it was one of the very few games lately with South Carolina where you could just be surprised by the play call almost every time. You couldn't just sit there and say, here's what they're going to do. And on the other side of the ball in defense, you can see what they're going to do. And if we can see it, so can these guys that are getting paid hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars to coach major college football. And that's been a big, I think, issue in my mind.
Yeah, and I think my thing, Chris, and I'm not a coach, and John Hoke was in the NFL for a lot of years. The guy has to know a great deal about defense, but I'm also sitting there. To me, it's almost a numbers game up front when you have a guy who is as quick and fast as Kyler Murray playing quarterback, and they're running. A&M's running the zone read, and you're basically putting your defensive end in a position where he's having to account for a running back and a quarterback, which is what you could easily see was the case on a lot of these read runs. That's the type thing the zone read is designed for. Like, that's the way the zone read is supposed to work. And I especially with the personnel South Carolina has, if you have some guys up front that are just very disruptive and can get in the backfield and blow up a play, then maybe you can stop the zone read with 2 high safeties. But I'm looking at South Carolina and how they're outnumbered up front, and then I try to watch as much college football as I can on Saturdays, and I look at other teams. I look at Tennessee trying to get ready for the Tennessee South Carolina game and prep for that. I watch Houston with Tom Herman. I watch the Florida Georgia game. Teams all around the country, it seems like more often than not, have that safety cheated up into the box, and then you watch South Carolina, and they sit in that cover two just way more often than not. And I'm sitting there saying, how can the guys be expected to stop a running threat like Kyler Murray without that additional help in the box? So, I've asked some high school defensive coaches I know, basically off the record, how can you stop this with that look? And the answers I'm getting is that it's very difficult to do. So that's something that I just don't quite understand, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, great point. And they've just got to find a way to do something different. They've got to be more aggressive. I understand why it's risky to blitz a team like Texas A&M, okay, or a team like Clemson, or a team like Tennessee. I understand it, but Kyler Murray showed in a very limited sample size in that game that when pressure came, that it affected him. It's not as if they were throwing the ball deep a lot. USC did a good job defending the deep ball. Part of that was because Murray, didn't hit those deep balls. He had an opportunity or two to at least get the ball in play and didn't. But you've got to find a way to pressure him and affect him. And when you're not changing your defensive call enough, when they can go to the line and basically see what you're in, that gives the team and the coaching staff on the other side a lot more confidence in whatever it is that they're calling. That they can go up there and execute it because they know what it is. And look, these coaches are good. I mean, they know what plays have the best chance of beating what coverage. There's no perfect coverage. There's no perfect offensive play. You got to go out there and execute it on either side. But if they know what you're doing, it makes it a heck of a lot easier. And so, for Murray, if it's me, and it is easy for us to sit here in hindsight and say this is what we would do if we were coaches. We're not coaches. But it's easy to see that, look, maybe you try something different. Maybe you try affecting the guy. Because if he can just run around and has an easy read option or an easy pitch or an easy keep on that option play, or he doesn't have a lot of pressure in the passing game and can make easy throws, you go and you take your chances with the freshman quarterback trying to do that. So, yeah, I don't get it. They've got to vary the calls more. They've got to vary what they do up front. We can talk all we want about guys. Look, they didn't win up front. They got beat up front, no doubt about it. But they've got to do some things differently as far as running more games up front or just changing the front more, changing the defensive call, blitzing, just doing some things differently. This team isn't good enough to just line up and say, here we are, here it is. We're going to stop you. And the fact is, Wes, nobody's really good enough to do that anymore. You don't see Alabama just sitting there saying, here's our 3-4 defense. We're going to do the exact same thing every time.
No.
They have their base defense, but they go out there and do things differently, and you've got to do that this day and time. I understand and appreciate simplifying it and stressing technique, but you got to play with great technique no matter what the call is. And at some point, if this team doesn't change what they're doing defensively, it's going to be a long finish to the year because of some of the teams they're playing.
Yeah, and I just and there are ways schematically to bring an extra guy in the box and not play man coverage on the outside. There are ways to do that without necessarily completely allowing the deep ball. I think we don't see this team sit in cover 3 very often, where you can still bring a guy up but still protect against the deep pass. You don't, they're very, these are very, very basic defenses. Every team in the country, I would imagine, runs some version of a cover 2 zone, a cover 3 zone, some version of a cover 1, man free, and then everyone has kind of their blitz packages. But to me, you don't really see South Carolina even do all those things. It's they have a few blitz packages, but it seems like a lot of times they're pretty much the same common ones when they do run those, and they haven't really, I thought they had a more diverse game plan against Vanderbilt than they did this past week against Texas A&M. So those are, I think, all questions that we all have the questions, but I don't know if any of us have the answers to necessarily, why that is. But on the other side, like you said, I think kind of repeating that word diverse again. I thought you saw a pretty diverse offensive game plan. For the first time in a while, I think you kind of saw plays that complemented one another. You saw the kind of end around to Lorenzo Nunez, which had a pass element there if he wanted it. Then you had an end around to Pharaoh Cooper, and then later on you faked that same exact look, which basically showed ways where you could take a play and then complement it later on. That's what, to me, the great play callers in college football or in football in general do, is they give a look and then they have another look off that same look. So I thought that was really good. And I thought, it's one thing coaches always talk about, well, we're going to try to fix, fill in the blank, whatever mistakes you had. South Carolina said, got to fix red zone woes. I saw a team that when it got into the red zone had some plays in its back pocket that were designed specifically for that reason. You saw, again, the sort of end around to Lorenzo Nunez, which was a play we hadn't seen all year. And then you saw them go in the I formation and basically fake the fullback dive and then flip it out to Brandon Wilds, a little misdirection. That's a play we haven't seen all year either. So I saw on the offensive side a staff that took the bye week and said, here are our problems. How do we go about fixing them? Let's try to do something different to do that. And to me, that what I just said, that sentence sums up what good coaching is, in one sentence. So I think on that side of the ball, you got to give those guys credit. On the other side of the ball, you're looking at it saying, why have there not been changes? Because sure, you can't change up your entire scheme, but with 2 weeks, you can add extra calls. I mean, there might be 18 and 22-year-old kids, but they've played football their whole life. You can add a few different packages to the defense with 2 weeks to prepare for Texas A&M. So that's probably just, if you're a Gamecock fan out there listening or on our Gamecock Central message boards, that's got to be just disappointing for you to watch that happen, because there's really no true explanation for it.
No, there's not. And it'd be just like, okay, if at some point you have to live with what you've got. And by that I mean, if you come into the season and say, we are going to be a man coverage team, we're playing man, and then you find out that for one reason or another your corners and your safeties can't cover anybody man to man, well, are you going to just play man the entire rest of the season and just pray that you get exponentially better? Probably not, or you shouldn't. If you're not getting pressure up front, if your D-line's not getting pressure, are you probably going to try at least to blitz more to remedy that? Probably so. Now, you can't completely change around what you're going to do, and I don't think anybody's advocating that South Carolina completely changes the defense, starts running a completely different scheme, but you do have to make adjustments. And in my mind, it's not good enough just to put the product out and then afterwards just say we've got to get better, we got to have better run fits. I understand that. Everybody, it doesn't matter what defense you're playing. If your run fits aren't good, if you're not winning up front, if you're not covering people, you're probably not going to be very good. That's understandable. But this is a game where scheme counts. You have to be physical, you have to win up front and do all those things. Doesn't matter the scheme. I know that. But you also have to make sure that your scheme is putting your guys in position to where, they can make plays. And as you said, Wes, I mean, John Hoke has been in more, football meetings, has coached longer, has played. He knows more about football than we do. But it's just very difficult to for an outsider, I think, to assess the situation and not go, why are they not doing something different? Mm-hmm. I think that's what's driving people crazy, because you have to change something different. You can't have, very similar calls or the same call on over and over again, and just magically expect the guys to go out there and execute it much, much better. At some point, you have to say, look, it's not working. Let's try something different. And if we still get beat, it is what it is. But I'll tell you, if they go out and they play cover two a good bit of the time, or even if they just play man free, if they don't vary up front, if they don't vary their blitz packages more against Tennessee, Clemson, even Florida and the Citadel, it's going to be a very long day. I just don't see them stopping those teams because they're going to exploit the same things that all these other teams have exploited.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I want to remind everybody listening, hopefully we've got some folks already there on the Gamecock Central message boards, but check out our site, because we do have a trial going on right now where you can read our premium content for the rest of the season for absolutely free if you're not already a premium member. And you'll get our full breakdown of this Texas A&M, a close game where they showed improvement, but obviously not enough improvement to win the game. We'll have full breakdowns to everything that happened in the game. And then, of course, we'll move forward to the Tennessee game. And, I think it's a perfect segue because you just mentioned it could be tough sledding for South Carolina if they don't fix some things. And before we get into a little bit of coaching search stuff, maybe just some off the top of your head early thoughts on Tennessee. I'm looking at this team as one that I think has improved gradually, Chris, as the season has gone along. Joshua Dobbs, a guy that is clearly a different quarterback than Kyler Murray, but I think from a scheme standpoint, or at least from how you have to defend them, kind of brings some of the same qualities. He's bigger than Kyler Murray, not as fast, but he can run. He actually can run through tackles a little bit. And for what I've seen in Tennessee, they do some not quite as much zone read or speed option to the outside type stuff, more just designed runs for him, designed runs for Jalen Hurd, the power game up front with the guards pulling. This is a team that, again, I just think from a numbers standpoint, South Carolina not going to be able to sit their safeties back and cover two and expect to stop this offense, because it's an offense that has, I think, improved as the season has gone along.
Yeah, it has, and they took a lot of heat early in the season for the way that they lost a couple games, rightfully so. But this is a team that you look across it and has some talent, both sides of the ball. But, yeah, looking at their offense, I think a lot of people were talking about their receivers going into this year. I think it's been, though, Josh Dobbs running and making some throws, and then their running backs with Kamara and Hurd. Those guys have been the bigger storylines, as you pointed out. And they will run more power, like you said. They'll run some counter. They'll run Dobbs in some different ways. And so there are some different challenges, but a lot of them are very similar to A&M in that, okay, you've got a mobile quarterback who can throw it. Dobbs is more polished, throwing it around and throwing it downfield, and he certainly has some capable receivers. And then the running backs really concern you if you're South Carolina because, you got a guy in Hurd who's just a big back. He can run around you, run over you. Kamara's a very good back, too. And those guys can really get out on the edges on the perimeter with the perimeter run game and really hurt you. And when I look back at a lot of games this season, that has really hurt South Carolina, the run game in general. But I think against Vandy with Darius Sims, he had a big day getting out on the perimeter against USC. And when I've watched Tennessee, I think that's the thing that concerns you. So, yeah, they're going to have to devote more bodies to the run. If they lose because Josh Dobbs is hitting passes all over the field, I think you have to live with that. But you can't let this team just run up and down the field on you because when they're looking at the tape of South Carolina, that's probably exactly what they're thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, you look at that score, Tennessee beating Kentucky. Some of their score, they actually had a long kickoff return for touchdown. They had a score or two set up by turnovers deep in Kentucky's territory. So some of the scores in that game were set up by stuff like that. And I think it goes without saying, South Carolina's not going to beat a Tennessee, beat a Florida, or beat a Clemson if they turn the ball over in their own territory or they give up kick returns for touchdowns, stuff like that. So no easy points allowed for the Gamecocks if they're going to win any of those big ball games they have coming up to close out the season. And finally, we did tease we'd talk a little coaching search, so we will certainly do that now. And I'll start, Chris, quickly with your. What have your thoughts been though on the job Sean Elliott has done? I think we do pretty much agree that he was kind of going to be a long shot to lose that interim tag coming in, but he certainly has done some good things. He has rallied the team. What have your impressions been of Sean Elliott, the interim head coach?
Well, I do think he's done some things to make it more fun, to inject some energy, and changing some things up, and things that I do believe have helped. I mean, a 9-point win over Vandy didn't exactly fire everyone up, but again, it was in the early stages of seeing some changes on offense that have benefited this team. I think. I don't think anybody expected South Carolina to be as competitive at Texas A&M as they were, and the offense was a big reason for that. They were able to go down and. Again, we covered it. Had some creative plays, had some good offensive plays, despite the fact that this is not a super talented offense. But yet they made those adjustments, and they've done a better job, and they've kept South Carolina more competitive and given them at least an outlook to where you think they can perhaps be more competitive going forward. But for me, the question is Elliott going to do anything on the defensive side of the ball? I don't think anybody's happy with how it's going on defense, and certainly it's a unique situation with him being an interim head coach. But what can he do? What will he do on that side of the ball? Will we see anything different, next game against Tennessee and then going forward? But again, he's still – I don't think anything's changed as far as his chances to ultimately get the job. But I do think that he was the right guy, I think, to peg – for interim head coach because of some of the things that he's done that have really helped. It didn't really help USC's outlook. Like Sean Elliott didn't get the job and you didn't go, okay, they're going to win a bunch of games now. I mean, that just wouldn't have been realistic. But I do think it's been a positive pegging him as the interim guy.
Yeah, and like you said, he has done some good things. That I think the big question for him going forward is going to be kind of, maybe some game management type stuff, and you could probably argue that some of his calls ended up being correct in that I'm specifically talking about you had a couple of fourth downs in the fourth quarter around midfield, South Carolina, with an excellent punter, a punter who's great at putting the ball down there and downing it inside the 20-yard line, inside the 10 a lot of times. But the two decisions to punt on fourth down around midfield, yes, South Carolina got the ball back, but I think the last time they got the ball back didn't have much time left, clearly, and really was where they were in a situation that they were going to have to throw the football. So I thought those were some decisions he made where he's talked about, we have nothing to lose. He said, we were going to go for 2 if we had scored on the final drive. It's easy to say those things that we're going to play aggressively. We're going to play like we have nothing to lose if you're Sean Elliott, but when South Carolina had a couple opportunities to maybe put the game away against Vanderbilt, they kicked field goals instead of going for it. Punted in those situations against Texas A&M, and then I thought and we can argue back and forth the merits of those situations if there was a right call or wrong call. But then I thought I had an issue at the end of the game where you don't call a timeout after you forced a fourth down for Texas A&M when you're at a point where at that time the time is way more important than that timeout, saving it. Because if you have the football, there's many things you can do just to stop the clock. You can step out of bounds, you can clock it, you can get a first down. If A&M has the ball, they're certainly going to run that other 30 seconds off the clock. So I had an issue with that basically wasted a good 40 seconds off the clock. Which was to me, even though he's a second game interim head coach, with the game on the line, that's a mistake you probably can't make.
Yeah. There are a lot of things in that game where, you go, maybe if they did this or that a little bit different, it would have given them a chance. Certainly, you mentioned those things at the half and at the end of the game. But really, Wes, I completely agree with you on those points. But I just think the defense just didn't give them as much of a chance. Now, the second half, they did a little bit better job, for sure. They only gave up one offensive touchdown to A&M in that second half. So they bowed up a little bit, and the offense sputtered in the second half. But, the offense did enough in that game overall. And the offensive staff put their guys in position overall enough times to win that game. But I do think this will be a test going forward for Elliott as far as, how his tenure as interim head coach is defined. And it's important. It's important, not only for this season, because fans want to win no matter what, but it's important, to show what he can do, because he's a guy that a lot of people think can be a head coach somewhere in the future. And also for just, for his own sake, because he's a guy that's probably got a pretty good shot, I would think, depending on who the hire is, of hanging around on the next staff. And so these things are important for him just personally, and then important for the team as well. But to me, the biggest thing is going to be, what does he do with the defense? Does he? Because he's talked a lot about adjusting things, making changes to personnel, to scheme. They've done that on offense. Will they do it on defense on a larger scale? That's the thing I'm going to be most curious to see.
It will definitely be interesting. And finally, Chris, and everyone can read on GamecockCentral.com about our complete coverage of the coaching search. But just to hit on it real quickly, my thought process is this kind of I guess big three that I think most people are talking about, at least on our message boards. We know that Ray Tanner is going to make an exhaustive search. He's going to basically look into any possible candidates, and he could fall in love with other guys. But at least on paper, with this big three we've talked about the most, Tom Herman, Justin Fuente, Kirby Smart, when I look at the positives of these three guys, I just think there is a ton to like about all three of them.
Yeah, definitely. And all three of those guys bring different things to the table, but I think all of them hit on areas USC wants to hit on, and that is a younger guy who's going to bring energy, toughness, discipline, be able to recruit well one way or another at South Carolina. So all those guys hit the boxes. And look, all these guys have come up for other jobs too. There's a reason that they're coming up at South Carolina. It's because they have been or currently are hot names in coaching, and especially Fuente and Herman right now, because they have been head coaches. Tom Herman only for 8 games, of course, and Justin Fuente for, bringing a Memphis program up to where it is now from where it was when he got there, which was not good at all. And then Kirby Smart, because he's worked for Nick Saban and knows the Southeast, the SEC, highly regarded as a good coach and a good recruiter too. For me, Wes, when I look at these guys and knowing what South Carolina is looking for, I think there's things to like about all of them. I think a lot of people look at Fuente and peg him as sort of the best coach, X's and O's on field, and the best program builder and the most proven guy as a head coach. Smart, you look at him and you're most intrigued because he knows the SEC the best. He's got those connections. He could build a staff. And then Herman, you look at as sort of the quote-unquote cliche home run hire because he models his program after Urban Meyer. He's a bright guy. He's tough, disciplined type guy, gets after it in recruiting, and he's put out a good product on field too. And for me, honestly, I think just looking strictly at the profile, I think Tom Herman may check the most, boxes, so to speak, out of what they're looking for. But I don't think you could really go wrong with any of them.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see. And we, of course, will give you complete coverage of that there on GamecockCentral.com, where, again, you can get a free trial right now that will take you all the way through the end of the Gamecocks season. And we'll break down every game, every recruit, every basketball game as well coming up there on GamecockCentral.com. And I think that, Chris, is about going to do it for GamecockCentral.com radio today. Again, follow Chris on Twitter. Chris, that is at GC Chris Clark, correct?
That's right, GC Chris Clark.
And then myself at Wes Mitchell GC. And follow Gamecock Central on Twitter at Gamecock Central. For Chris and for myself and for Jeff Tyner, who is doing an excellent job behind the board there at the Gamecock Central studios. We will talk to you next time on Gamecock Central Radio.